This is another installment of A Common Sense Patriot. I'm Lou. I'd like to start with this old adage. Those who beat their swords into plowshares will plow for those who don't. This is going to be a short, but I hope thought-provoking presentation for some. I'm going to talk about the Second Amendment, but about an argument in support of that precious freedom that never seems to be part of the conversation defending our right to keep and bear arms. Quite honestly, I have always been blown away that this point has been so ignored in the mainstream media dialogue. Now, I'm certainly not the only one person to see it this way, and I'm sure it gets discussed. I've just personally never heard anyone talking about it. I don't know, maybe I'm just sheltered and need to get out more. Anyway, we all know that a huge part of why our founders gave us the Second Amendment was to protect ourselves from our own government's potential tyranny. And we'll talk about that at length in a future installment. But there's another argument, and I believe it's equally as important. On April 18, 1943, Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, was shot down and killed by Americans flying P-38s. Yamamoto, a brilliant tactician and Harvard-educated, once said these very important words. Quote, "You cannot invade mainland United States. There would be a rifle behind every blade of grass." End quote. That simple yet profound statement refers to America's Second Amendment and private gun ownership and the security for our nation that provides. Now, that quote is often discredited as being bogus and not something Yamamoto ever said. Of course it is, because it certainly wouldn't help the anti-gun narrative, now, would it? But let's look at a couple of things related to that. Yamamoto did attend Harvard from 1919 to 1921. He was also stationed in Washington, D.C. as a naval attaché, twice. He was against going to war with the United States because within the Japanese military, he was uniquely acquainted with America and her military and production capabilities and her culture, as he'd spent a great deal of time here. He also pretty much knew that a war with America would most likely end badly for Japan. Here are a couple of undisputed quotes from Yamamoto. "In the first 6 to 12 months of a war with the United States and Great Britain, I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But then, if the war continues after that, I have no expectation of success." And, quote, "Should hostilities once break out between Japan and the United States, it is not enough that we take Guam and the Philippines, nor even Hawaii and San Francisco. To make victory certain, we would have to march into Washington and dictate the terms of peace in the White House." To me, that part about Hawaii and San Francisco is an indication that, being the brilliant tactician and realist he was, he knew Japan would have to invade the U.S. on the West Coast because they could supply the war from Japan easier that way, and then fight their way across the entire country to the East Coast to conquer America. And as a result, he also knew that America's private gun ownership meant that armed American citizens would be shooting at Japanese troops the entire way. And that, in itself, would preclude Japan from ever subduing the United States. But whatever. let's make the assumption he didn't say those specific words about guns and grass. Whether Yamamoto or Hitler or Patton or Joe Namath or Little Red Riding Hood or Charlie Brown's Great Pumpkin said it or didn't say it is inconsequential. What is important is that private firearm ownership here in America is a huge contributor to our national security. What's my proof of that, you may ask? Well, the Japanese didn't march into D.C. at the end of World War II, did they? In fact, they didn't march on the U.S. mainland at all. Amazingly enough, history shows that the Germans didn't either. Nor have Russian troops, or Chinese troops, or Iranian troops, or anyone else's troops for that matter. And not only have they not marched into D.C., they haven't marched into Chicago, or Dallas, or Atlanta, or Kansas City, or Bozeman, or Bakersfield, or Memphis, or whatever town you live in either. In fact, there's never been a military incursion by another country into the United States mainland, with the exception, I believe, of the War of 1812, where we basically won our independence from Britain a second time. I've heard people say that Mexico invaded the U.S. to attack the Alamo. Not true, as the Battle of the Alamo was fought in 1836, and the U.S. didn't annex Texas until 1845. The point, folks, is that private firearm ownership here in America is a large part of our long-time and continuing successful national security. Oh, and by the way, I believe Yamamoto did say that about a rifle behind each blade of grass, but that's just me. Now, to one final point. The anti-gun part of our culture and our politicians want to take away our access to certain types of firearms first. They call them assault rifles and semi-automatic handguns. Apparently, they're not quite as concerned with old school .38 revolvers and double-barrel shotguns. Why does a private citizen need an AR-15, they cry, with a 30-round magazine? Just as an aside, ask most politicians what the AR part of AR-15 stands for, and they'll say, why, assault rifle, of course. Actually, AR stands for Armalite Rifle, after the company Armalite that designed and manufactured them back in the late 1950s. In any case, the thing you must ask yourself is this. If another country invades America, do you think their soldiers will be toting Wild West six-shooters and shotguns? Or will they be carrying the battle to us with AR and AK platforms, the fully automatic versions, machine guns, or maybe even more modern automatic and semi-automatic rifles and handguns? The more important question, though, is this. Were that to ever happen, would we, the people, be better equipped to join the battle to repel them with our own ARs and AKs and modern handguns, or with cowboy pistols and deer rifles? Here's the answer to that question based on history. America and her allies defeated the Axis powers in World War II largely because the average Japanese, German, and Italian soldier carried an old-style bolt-action rifle, where the action had to be manually opened and closed after each round was fired. U.S. troops, on the other hand, were mostly equipped with the new M1 Garand rifle. It was a semi-automatic 30-06 rifle with an 8-round clip, a huge advantage over a bolt-action rifle. So I think it's important for everyone, whether you're a private gun ownership advocate or an anti-gun crusader, to understand that if our firearms are taken away, particularly the ones of more contemporary design, what the consequences are. There will be nothing to keep our government from forcing their will on we the people. nor will there be any way to fight back if another world power decides we're easy pickings now because the citizens have been disarmed. So to close, never, ever, ever let yourselves forget the following. An armed man is a citizen. An unarmed man is a subject. I'm a common sense patriot. Godspeed.